water fuel cell. In 1998, in a quiet Ohio suburb, inventor Stanley Meyer walked out of a restaurant mid-lunch and collapsed in the parking lot. Witnesses heard his last words before he died. "They poisoned me." Minutes earlier, he had been discussing an invention that, if true, would have rewritten the world's energy economy, a car powered not by gasoline, but by water. Stanley Meyer wasn't a crank. He held patents for a water fuel cell, gave multiple public demonstrations, and attracted the attention of both venture capitalists and intelligence agencies. His device, mounted on a modified dune buggy, reportedly split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen using a process called electrolytic dissociation. But Meyer claimed his version used so little electricity that it broke the known laws of thermodynamics. In other words, it worked but shouldn't have. His water-powered car was filmed running across highways, sputtering softly as vapor trailed from the exhaust. No gasoline, no emissions, only water. He turned the ignition with the words, "This is the future." The U.S. Department of Energy never officially tested the device. Still, Meyer's claims gained traction. Media outlets covered his work. He was contacted by NATO scientists. Foreign interests, some allegedly from the Middle East, reportedly tried to purchase the technology outright. He refused. The day of his death, Meyer was dining with two Belgian investors. His brother, Stephen Meyer, recalled that Stanley burst out of the restaurant clutching his throat, vomited, and collapsed. The cause of death was ruled a cerebral aneurysm. No toxins were detected. No further investigation was pursued. The prototype car was taken. The patents lapsed. The workshop was emptied. Later, researchers who tried to replicate Meyer's design found that the core schematics had inconsistencies, as if key details were removed or altered. Some claimed the energy input required far exceeded the output. Others noted that Meyer used unconventional components, non-standard transformers, pulse-frequency circuits, and resonance tuning, suggesting he had discovered a very specific, unstable configuration that was never publicly documented. To this day, the location of the original water fuel cell is unknown. The patents, though public, are incomplete. Engineers who attempted to recreate the effect often report equipment failure, shorted circuits, or unexplained burnouts. Forums discussing Meyer's work are flooded with conflicting data, lost links, and dead ends. If Stanley Meyer truly invented a way to run engines on water, it would have made the oil industry obsolete, destabilize geopolitical power, and restructure the global economy overnight. And if that's what his invention threatened, then someone had every reason to ensure it never left the garage. The electric car recall. In 1996, under tight security and a rare sense of optimism, General Motors released the EV1, the world's first mass-produced electric vehicle. It was sleek, silent, and decades ahead of its time. Leaseholders in California and Arizona were among the first to drive a car that didn't rely on a single drop of gasoline. The vehicle moved with such smooth precision that drivers described it as gliding on air. But within just a few years, every single EV1 was hunted down, recalled, and destroyed by the very company that built it. The EV1 wasn't a prototype. It was a functioning electric vehicle with a 100-mile range, regenerative braking, and zero emissions. It had its own support infrastructure. Charging stations were built across major cities, and GM invested heavily in marketing it as the future. Despite the limitations of battery technology at the time, the EV1 exceeded expectations. Drivers adored it. There were waiting lists for new leases, but something shifted. By 1999, rumors spread that GM was no longer enthusiastic about the program. The lease agreements, strangely, never allowed anyone to buy the vehicle outright. In 2002, GM began systematically repossessing all EV1s, even from satisfied drivers willing to pay to keep them. Some resisted. A few even offered to buy their cars at full market price. GM refused, one by one. The cars were removed from the streets and transported to a fenced-off desert lot in Arizona. There, most were crushed. No technical recall was ever issued. No fatal flaws were revealed. The official explanation cited maintenance costs, battery limitations, and lack of consumer demand. But documents later revealed that GM, along with other automakers and oil industry representatives, had quietly lobbied California to roll back its zero-emission vehicle mandate, a law that had originally compelled GM to create the EV1 in the first place. Internal memos hinted at something deeper, concern that the EV1 would trigger an infrastructure overhaul, threatening gasoline sales, engine part supply chains, and even the business models of dealerships, which relied heavily on repairs. Electric vehicles needed fewer repairs, fewer oil changes, fewer replacement parts, too few profit points. A handful of EV1 has survived, mostly in museums, gutted of their drivetrains, rendered immobile. Former engineers and program leads spoke out years later, calling the cancellation a corporate execution. Chris Payne's 2006 documentary, Who Killed the Electric Car, presented compelling evidence that the EV1 didn't fail. It was silenced. Today, electric cars dominate headlines. But long before Tesla, Rivian, or Lucid, the EV1 existed, and then, almost deliberately, did not. What changed wasn't the technology. What changed was who was allowed to profit from it. The Tesla Power Tower. In 1901, on a windswept cliff in Shoreham, New York, a massive structure began to rise. A strange skeletal tower designed not for war nor communication, but to deliver energy invisibly through the air. At its center was Nikola Tesla, the brilliant and erratic inventor, who claimed he had discovered a way to transmit limitless electrical power without wires. He called it the Wardenclyffe Tower. He said it could light up the world. But within a few short years, the project was abandoned, its funding pulled, and the tower demolished. Tesla's dream wasn't fantasy. His earlier experiments had proven it was possible to transmit radio waves across long distances. But the Wardenclyffe Tower aimed for something far greater: wireless transmission of electrical power using the Earth's natural resonance. The tower's copper dome, buried grounding rods, and high-voltage coils weren't just architectural curiosities. They were carefully tuned to Tesla's theories of planetary vibration. His vision was simple, terrifying, and revolutionary: a global grid of towers, transmitting free electricity to any receiver on the planet. No wires, no power companies, no meters, no control. Initially funded by J.P. Morgan, the project was cloaked in mystery. Tesla spoke publicly about sending messages across the Atlantic, even communicating with Mars. But privately, he revealed to Morgan that his true goal was to bypass the entire centralized energy industry. That was the moment everything changed. Morgan pulled the funding. No other financier stepped forward. Construction halted in 1905. By 1917, the tower was torn down, allegedly for scrap. Official reasons cited bankruptcy and technical limitations, but internal correspondences and later interviews painted a darker picture. Tesla's plan, if successful, would have rendered the emerging energy monopolies obsolete. Morgan famously asked, "Where do we put the meter?" A question that exposed the core problem. Power without profit was a threat, not a breakthrough. Tesla's notebooks from the Wardenclyffe era went missing after his death. Some were reportedly seized by the U.S. Office of Alien Property, though none involved foreign nationals. Others were quietly auctioned or never seen again. The most complete remaining diagrams hint at a working system, one we still don't fully understand. Decades later, modern engineers attempting to recreate the design encounter inexplicable failures. Arcs that should occur but don't. Resonances that vanish mid-test. Tesla himself hinted that the system required not just machinery, but planetary alignment, a convergence of electromagnetic conditions that, once broken, may never be recoverable. If the Wardenclyffe Tower had functioned as Tesla intended, the world would not look like it does today. The age of wires, batteries, and fossil fuel grids might never have begun, but the tower was dismantled, and with it, the only chance humanity may have had for energy without chains: the eternal light bulb. In a fire station in Livermore, California, a single light bulb has been glowing since 1901, nicknamed the Centennial Bulb. It hangs quietly from the ceiling, emitting a soft amber light 24 hours a day. The bulb has survived world wars, earthquakes, and technological revolutions. It has outlived every other device in the building. Most astonishingly, it still works over 120 years later. This small object, barely noticed by the world, might be the strongest evidence of a truth few dare to speak aloud: that we were once capable of building things that last forever and then chose not to. Manufactured by the Shelby Electric Company in the late 19th century, the bulb was crafted using a hand-blown glass envelope, thick filament coils, and materials that modern light bulbs no longer include. Scientists examining its longevity point to filament, carbon-based and slowly burning, unlike the modern tungsten designs that burn brighter but fail faster. And yet, the Centennial Bulb is not a one-time anomaly. In the early 1900s, other bulbs from the same era lasted decades. Some remained lit for over 60 years in factories and mines. But something shifted in the 1920s. That shift had a name: the Phoebus Cartel. In 1924, a secretive alliance formed between the world's largest light bulb manufacturers, General Electric, Philips, Osram, and others. Their goal was not to improve the bulb, but to limit its lifespan. Documents later uncovered revealed that the cartel agreed to artificially cap bulb longevity at 1,000 hours. Engineers who submitted bulbs lasting longer were reprimanded. Designs were deliberately altered. The result was an early and powerful form of planned obsolescence. Customers would be forced to buy more bulbs, more often. Profits soared, and the world quietly forgot that a longer-lasting light source had ever been possible. Attempts to revive the old designs have met resistance. Original Shelby manufacturing records are sparse. Labs that reverse-engineered the Centennial bulb's composition discovered a formula incompatible with modern mass production methods, not because the materials are rare, but because they don't align with the supply chains and business models built on constant replacement. The Centennial bulb is still glowing. It has its own live webcam feed, watched by thousands who marvel at its endurance. But its existence raises a chilling question. If we once knew how to build something to last more than a century, what else have we learned and then buried in the name of control? The Eastern Air Cleaner. In the early 1990s, deep within the crumbling industrial zones of post-Soviet Eastern Europe, a team of engineers unveiled a machine that promised to make air pollution a thing of the past. Developed in secret by a group of former military scientists in the outskirts of Krakow, Poland, the device was small, boxy, and completely silent. It could purify the air of an entire room in minutes, not just of dust or smoke, but of toxic industrial chemicals, airborne viruses, and microscopic pollutants down to the atomic level. The prototype operated using a type of cold plasma filtration combined with an electrostatic field that altered the charge of airborne particles. As contaminants passed through the device, they were not just captured, they were deconstructed, their molecular bonds broken apart without releasing secondary emissions. It needed no filter replacements. It used almost no power, and it worked. Demonstrations stunned independent testers. In one test, the machine cleared formaldehyde and benzene from a sealed chamber within 11 minutes. In another, it reduced PM2.5 pollution in a warehouse by 6% within an hour. The team presented their findings to regional governments and international environmental groups. Funding contracts were suddenly revoked, and labs were ordered to cease all collaboration. By 1994, the development company had closed. The core team dispersed across Europe. Years later, one member anonymously claimed that a corporate syndicate with ties to HVAC manufacturers and petrochemical companies had bought out the remaining shares and buried the project under layers of shell ownership. No working prototype remains in public hands. Attempts to reproduce the system using the surviving schematics have all failed. Researchers say key elements are missing, particularly details involving the plasma ignition chamber and frequency harmonics. There are whispers that certain materials used in the original build were restricted after 1995, citing dual-use concerns under European export laws. Strangely, some surviving documents list medical applications for the technology, suggesting it could sterilize hospital rooms, neutralize airborne pathogens, and suppress transmission of viral outbreaks. None of those uses were ever explored. In a world choking on urban smog, living through respiratory pandemics, and battling rising asthma rates, the absence of technology like this feels less like a loss and more like an erasure. If we once held the key to cleaning the air completely, why was it taken away? And more importantly, who decided we weren't allowed to breathe it? The vacuum energy engine. In 1983, in a quiet suburb of Toronto, an independent engineer named Troy Hurtubise claimed to have built a small engine that could run indefinitely, not on fuel, electricity, or combustion, but on the controlled manipulation of vacuum pressure. The prototype, a curious box of copper coils, magnets, and titanium plates, was no larger than a shoebox. When activated, it emitted a soft humming sound and began to rotate a connected flywheel without any external power source. It was, according to its creator, a self-sustaining energy generator, and it terrified everyone who saw it work. Hurtubise had no corporate backing, no university affiliation, and no legal team. What he did have was an obsession with magnetic fields and a deeply unorthodox understanding of physics. He called his creation the Angel Light Engine, a term inspired by his belief that it tapped into natural forces not yet understood by mainstream science. He built it using components from military surplus stores and discarded MRI machines. To most, it looked like a bizarre science fair project, but when he invited journalists and engineers to observe, something unexplainable happened. The engine turned on and didn't stop. Witnesses reported that the device not only powered itself, but could produce enough torque to drive mechanical systems. Hurtubise claimed the engine worked by creating a vacuum inversion chamber, where opposing magnetic fields generated a constant differential pressure, mimicking the vacuum energy believed to exist in deep space. It was, in essence, a machine that borrowed energy from nothing and gave back more than it took. Shortly after his public demonstration, Hurtubise was visited by what he described as men in suits. He was questioned about his background, the source of his materials, and whether he intended to sell or patent the invention. A week later, his workshop burned to ground in what was ruled an electrical fire, despite the fact that the building had no grid connection and no active power at the time. No physical remnants of the engine survived the fire. Hurtubise tried to rebuild, but reported increasing surveillance, interference with his shipments, and repeated vandalism. He retreated from public view, later surfacing with new inventions, including bulletproof armor and electromagnetic devices, but never again discussed a vacuum engine. In 2018, he died in a mysterious single-vehicle accident. Skeptics dismiss the story as classic pseudoscience, an overambitious tinkerer chasing impossible physics. But others point to the consistency of his claims, the corroborated witness accounts, and the suspicious timing of the fire. The vacuum engine never received formal analysis, but its memory remains a symbol of what could have been: a power source without pollution, without infrastructure, without control. If vacuum energy truly exists, and if someone ever learned to harness it, what would happen to every industry built on scarcity? What happens when energy becomes free and unstoppable? The infinite battery. In 1973, a retired aerospace engineer named Carl Kordesh unveiled a prototype battery so durable that it threatened to make entire industries obsolete. Designed initially for use in long-range military radios and satellites, the unit was a hybrid of alkaline and hydrogen fuel cell technology, a power source capable of running continuously for up to 50 years without needing replacement or recharge. It was lightweight, rechargeable, and shockingly efficient. But after a few quiet tests and muted press coverage, the project was buried under decades of silence. Kordesh had already been instrumental in the development of the first alkaline battery and had worked on early fuel cells for NASA. His breakthrough came from merging the chemical stability of alkaline manganese dioxide with a closed-loop hydrogen system, allowing the battery to regenerate itself during operation. Unlike lithium-ion batteries, which degrade over time and require costly, dangerous mining for materials, Kordesh's design used common elements and minimal moving parts. It generated a continuous current, even when idle, and could function in extreme temperatures. When he presented the battery to energy regulators and corporate partners, the response was tepid. One representative from a major electronics manufacturer reportedly said, "This battery would last longer than any of our products. That's not sustainable for us." No licensing deal was signed. No further testing contracts were awarded. And despite its potential to revolutionize personal electronics, transportation, and even space travel, the design was shelved. Documents from Kordesh's personal archive, later made public by his estate, showed he had pitched the technology to multiple governments and corporations. Most meetings ended the same way: interest, followed by silence. He was encouraged to refocus on more commercially viable solutions, meaning products that would need replacing regularly. Attempt to patent the full regeneration system stalled under claims of insufficient industrial applicability. In 1982, a private investor attempted to relaunch the battery under a new company, promising power for life. Within 6 months, the startup collapsed. No units were ever produced at scale. The remaining prototypes, kept in storage, were later confiscated during a regulatory inspection for compliance review. They were never returned. Today, most battery technology remains trapped in cycles of planned obsolescence. Phones, electric vehicles, and power tools all require frequent recharging or replacement. And behind each cycle is a mountain of e-waste, toxic mining, and profit margins that rely on failure. What if that cycle was never necessary? What if we had already invented the perfect battery and then buried it because perfection was too dangerous to sell? The magnet drive motor. In the late 1970s, an unassuming physicist named Howard Johnson submitted a patent that would later be called impossible, unprovable, and by some deliberately suppressed. His claim was outrageous: that he had developed a magnetic motor capable of continuous motion without fuel, combustion, or electricity. The engine, powered solely by repelling magnetic fields, could rotate indefinitely once started. In 1980, to the astonishment of many, the U.S. Patent Office granted Patent No. 4,151,431 for a permanent magnet motor. Then, just as quickly as it emerged, the story disappeared. Johnson's design was deceptively simple. An array of curved permanent magnets arranged along a stator, interacting with equally precise magnets on a rotor. As the magnets passed each other, they created a cascading push, a sequence of rotational force that appeared, at least in demonstration, to sustain motion without input. Skeptics called it a trick. Engineers insisted it violated the second law of thermodynamics. But Johnson maintained that the motor didn't create energy. It merely released potential energy already stored within magnetic fields. He demonstrated it privately to journalists, physicists, and investors. Some believed, others scoffed. What everyone agreed on was this: the design didn't behave like any known machine. The response from the scientific community was swift and cold. Major journals refused to publish his findings. Labs that tried to replicate his work either failed or reported inexplicable interference in their setups. Magnetic field disruptions, spontaneous demagnetization, or instability in motion. Some speculated the motor required materials or alignments so precise that replication was impossible without access to Johnson's original workshop. As interest grew, Johnson found himself under increasing pressure. Legal challenges emerged regarding the scope of his patent. Several companies that expressed interest in licensing the design abruptly withdrew. One collaborator reported that offers were made to purchase and bury the patent for a sum that would ensure Johnson's silence. He refused. By the late 1980s, Johnson was out of funding. His health declined. He gave fewer interviews. In one of his last recorded statements, he said, "They didn't have to disprove me. They just had to outlast me." He died in 2008. His motor unbuilt on a commercial scale. His legacy left in half-forgotten patent records and scattered technical papers. To this day, the idea of a magnetic motor remains taboo in scientific circles, labeled as pseudoscience or conspiracy, despite the official existence of the patent. But if Johnson was right, even partly, his invention may have unlocked one of the last untapped sources of mechanical energy, silent, clean, and outside corporate control. So the question remains, did his motor truly break the laws of physics, or did it break something more sacred? The laws of profit, the trash fuel converter. In 2003, deep within a warehouse on the outskirts of Sao Paulo, Brazil, a small group of engineers unveiled a prototype they believed would end two global crises at once: energy scarcity and waste pollution. Their invention, roughly the size of a shipping container, could convert everyday household garbage into high-grade, clean-burning fuel. No smoke, no emissions, no toxic byproducts, just garbage in, gasoline out. The process they used was a tightly guarded innovation based on thermal depolymerization, enhanced by proprietary catalysts and high-pressure chambers. Unlike incineration or basic pyrolysis, their system could break down organic and synthetic material at a molecular level, reassembling carbon chains into usable fuel with over 80% conversion efficiency. Old shoes, plastic bottles, even food waste, all could be turned into clear liquid fuel indistinguishable from commercial gasoline. They called their project Project Gaia. Early demonstrations caught the attention of local politicians, environmental groups, and international media. One test powered a diesel generator for 48 hours using nothing but fuel derived from mixed urban garbage. Another produced fuel cleaner than what passed Brazil's regulatory standards. The technology wasn't just promising, it was working, and then suddenly it was gone. Within 2 months of a viral news segment airing on a national network, the facility was raided. Officials cited violations of environmental processing licenses. Machinery was confiscated for inspection. Permits were suspended. No arrests were made. No charges were filed. And no explanation was given. The engineers behind Project Gaia vanished from the public eye. One was reported to have relocated to Uruguay. Another later surfaced, working in unrelated software development. Requests for interviews were declined. Attempts to locate the confiscated prototype were met with redacted documents and regulatory dead ends. A Freedom of Information request filed by an independent journalist years later uncovered internal memos between government agencies and private energy firms. One memo, dated weeks before the raid, warned of disruptive fuel synthesis devices posing threat to existing infrastructure. Another suggested containment strategies for technologies bypassing traditional refining models. Today, The problem of waste has only grown more severe. Landfills overflow, plastic chokes oceans, and energy prices continue to climb. Yet, few remember the Brazilian machine that seemed to solve both. Skeptics say the system likely had undisclosed flaws, that scaling the process might have introduced dangerous emissions or unstable reactions. But the absence of data, the silence of the creators, and the swift and complete suppression of a working prototype raised darker questions. What if trash could be gold? And someone decided the world wasn't ready for that kind of alchemy. The illness prediction scanner. In 2009, in a modest medical research lab in Geneva, a group of biomedical engineers developed a device unlike anything seen in conventional diagnostics. Roughly the size of a shoebox, this prototype could scan a person's electromagnetic field and detect cellular anomalies long before symptoms appeared. It didn't rely on X-rays, blood samples, or MRIs. Instead, it mapped biofrequency signatures, comparing them to a vast database of disease markers. The results, in early tests, were startlingly accurate. The team behind the project called it Neuroscope. In clinical trials with terminally ill patients, the device consistently identified the presence of malignant growth weeks, and in some cases months, before they were visible through imaging. For neurological disorders, it detected early-stage Parkinson's and Alzheimer's based on subtle shifts in neural resonance. In controlled settings, it even flagged chronic conditions in subjects who had yet to be formally diagnosed. The underlying principle wasn't entirely new. For decades, fringe researchers had speculated that the human body emits a unique electromagnetic field influenced by its internal health. But the Neuroscope was the first to quantify and interpret those frequencies using machine learning, biofeedback, and ultrasensitive sensors capable of registering deviations in the body's harmonic patterns. Hospitals in Switzerland and Germany quietly began requesting pilot units. The World Health Organization took note. A pharmaceutical executive, shown a demonstration, reportedly asked, "If this works, why would anyone need routine screenings?" That question may have sealed the device's fate. Weeks later, the company's research license was suspended pending an investigation into data irregularities. Their servers were seized. Their lead engineer, a Romanian national, was deported for visa violations. All manufacturing contracts were voided. Public statements cited concerns over medical accuracy, but no conclusive rebuttal was ever issued. The Neuroscope vanished before it ever reached the market. Attempt to revive the project through private investors failed. The rights to the core technology were acquired through a shell corporation and have since remained inactive. Independent labs that tried to rebuild the system based on open-source fragments reported interference during calibration. Some accused the original team of deliberately omitting key components from their shared designs. Rumors persist that a working version still exists, used quietly in high-security medical facilities. Others claim it was dismantled because it posed a catastrophic risk to one of the most profitable sectors of modern healthcare: diagnostics. What if a machine could detect illness before it happened, and no one wanted you to have it? Conclusion: these inventions, scattered across decades and continents, do not form a random collection of curiosities. They reveal a pattern, a chilling model of suppression and erasure. They were not hoaxes. They were not flawed experiments. They were working systems, dismantled not by the laws of nature, but by the hands of men who saw too far, built too well, and threatened to shift power from the few to the many. Each case points to a methodical resistance, a system where breakthroughs are filtered through the lens of profitability and control. From Nikola Tesla's wireless power to a trash fuel generator in Brazil, these innovations were not evaluated by their potential to help humanity, but by the danger they posed to established hierarchies. The destruction was never loud. It came in silence, through seized patents, revoked funding, inexplicable fires, vanished labs, and lives ended in obscurity. What was lost is not just machinery, but the future itself. A future where light bulbs didn't need replacing, where engines ran on air, where pollution vanished, where disease could be seen before it struck. These were not simply ideas. They were turning points, and someone, somewhere, chose to turn away. The erasure continues. Whistleblowers disappear. Alternative engineers are smeared.